Hello, I'm Darryl Anderson and welcome to GroundCover TV, the first episode for 2013. We're kicking off the year in Western Australia, and behind me across the Swan River is Perth's CBD. We're here because it's in this city that the Australian Export Grains Innovation Centre will be built. More about that in a bit, but right now let's see what else is coming up in this episode of GroundCover TV. Rhizoctonia research that will change the way you look at your cereal crop.
Yeah, I'm sure that most growers and many agronomists don't necessarily link this uneven growth in sort of mid to late winter as being due to Rhizoctonia.
Lessons from the subcontinent. What a New South Wales pulse grower discovered in India that will have implications for Australia's Mungbeans industry.
It gives me great confidence that if we do it well in this nation, we'll easily be able to meet and exceed the expectations of those hungry people around the world.
And an impressive example of technological innovation.
That was the eureka moment, I guess. After that, it was just a matter of mechanically how do we get this thing to steer in the right spot.
Those stories and more in this episode of GroundCover TV. Now, it's a fair bet that this past season some wheat growers spent money spraying for stripe rust when they needn't have. It's not that they're dills. Whether to spray and when is a particularly complicated question, especially when you throw in the fact that a plant's resistance to the fungus can change as it matures. There's no way to make this a simple story, so let's start at the beginning. Resistance to cereal rust. And let's go to the source. Sydney University is the centre for all things rust in Australia, and Professor Robert Park is the GRDC Chair of Cereal Rust Research. Put simply, some wheat varieties have resistance, some don't.
You can see by looking at the responses of each of these varieties to stem rust that some are resistant and some are not. So for example, the first one in this particular variety is completely immune to stem rust, whereas the third one here is completely susceptible. And that's shown by these large pustules. The rust is actually infected and the plant has not been able to stop that infection.
Used to be that was pretty much all there was to it, but not anymore.
In the case of this variety here, the third one, which is fully susceptible, we know from previous experience when we've grown this in the field that it actually has a level of adult plant resistance. So we're not seeing that resistance here. The plants are completely susceptible in the seedling growth stages, but the resistance switches on as the plants get older. And the plant at adult plant growth stages, as I said, is resistant.
Okay, so a wheat crop with that kind of resistance gene might need protection early on, but later in the season it would be able to do the job itself. Not too complicated so far. Of course, if you had a paddock full of it, you'd want to know when the adult plant resistance might kick in.
Depends on the actual gene we're talking about, but typically, as a rule of thumb, this occurs around tillering to node formation in the plant growth cycle.
So, you'd reckon the ideal way to manage a crop like that would be to protect it when it's young, with seed dressings and maybe with in-furrow fungicides, monitor it and be ready to apply a fungicide spray if needed in the early stages. But after that you can sit back and watch the plant protect itself. Well, that might be ideal, but there's an argument for spraying even after adult plant resistance has switched on. Nick Poole from Far Australia is doing research for GRDC to test that argument.
Some growers and advisors will tend to turn their back on adult plant resistance by saying, well, my crop still loses green leaf area.
That loss of green leaf area is known commonly as flecking. To a biologist, it's necrosis. It's a sign that resistance is working. When a rust spore lands, it penetrates into the tissue. A resistant plant has a mechanism that recognises the intrusion. It deals with it by killing off tissue around the site of the infection, the necrosis. It deprives the pathogen of a host and stops it in its tracks. But of course that tissue is brown, it's dead, and dead tissue doesn't photosynthesize. So despite the fact that the plant has effectively resisted the pathogen, it's lost photosynthetic area. Now you'd have to think that that would make the plant less productive, which is what the argument for spraying says. It might be right, but it would be better to have real answers.
I think it's recognised that we don't have enough hard and fast data on how much that plant reaction costs you or doesn't cost you in terms of yield.
Far Australia's integrated fungicide management project here on this Sydney Uni farm should put some real numbers on those questions.
What we're doing is looking at key fungicide timings from early through to late. And by late, we're talking at that ear emergent stage, and early at just at the start of stem elongation, what we call the first node or growth stage 31. And right in the middle, flag leaf itself. If we think of the cereal plant, it's the top 3 leaves that we refer to sometimes on occasions as the money leaves, Darryl. They're probably some of the most important solar panels that the plant has to keep free of disease. In a way, part of the conundrum that this trial is investigating is that if we spray early at growth stage 31, the 2 top leaves aren't emerged at that stage. And although that may be the best time to coincide with adult plant resistance perhaps being more active later, in putting the fungicide on then, we're not putting fungicide on those top 2 leaves. One of the things that we don't feel we should need to do with cultivars that have got a level of adult plant resistance, these more intermediate rated cultivars, is they shouldn't need as much support right at the end of the season, so around that ear emergence phase. But we're not quite sure whether we should be treating them there at growth stage 31, 32, or here as the flag leaf starts to emerge.
But just to add complication, it turns out that varieties with adult plant resistance lose differing amounts of green area when they deal with the pathogen.
Within this trial we have 2 moderately resistant / moderately susceptible cultivars. One shows far more reaction and loss of green leaf than the other one does. So one becomes a much more clearer candidate for saying, well, is there any way in which we could control that reaction, and is that reaction actually significant in itself? So I think there are differences in terms of the way, how much leaf you lose before the disease is closed down.
We're making steady progress in understanding how those different varieties perform in terms of adult plant resistance. What are the key environmental factors that will actually cause that resistance to trigger and become effective? And through that knowledge, growers are actually being able to make much more strategic decisions about when to apply fungicides.
With that progress, though, comes a warning. The pathogens don't stay still or stay the same. Widespread planting of susceptible varieties and unnecessary spraying are creating the conditions for the fungi to gain the upper hand.
More than 25% of the varieties grown in southern region are actually susceptible, and that's created some real challenges because the inoculum is very high of stripe rust, and as a consequence of that we've seen a lot of green bridge and consequential mutation of pathotypes. And what we're seeing now is a rapid development of new pathotypes which are knocking out the resistance genes we have for a number of varieties.
We see in situations where the rates of vaccination against, say, whooping cough have dropped, whooping cough has made a comeback. And rust is very, very similar. So if the industry is to be protected as a whole from rust, with genetics, we really need adoption across the entire industry of rust resistance.
I think first and foremost we have to remember we're about trying to control the disease. We're trying to break the disease cycle. And the green leaf retention argument is something that we're trying to put some figures around. But ultimately, I think growers need to think in terms of how they can reduce the levels of inoculum in their crop.
GRDC released a fact sheet on adult plant resistance late last year, and you can access it online by using this link. Earlier I mentioned Perth will be home to the Australian Export Grains Innovation Centre, Well, it's here at the Department of Agriculture and Food Western Australia's South Perth site that the new facility is to be built. But before these plots are replaced by buildings, a few more trial crops will emerge. Speaking of crop emergence, that's usually when most growers check their paddocks for Rhizoctonia. But after this next story, that might change.
In trials being conducted across the southern and western grain regions, new ways of using fungicides to control Rhizoctonia are being developed. It's research that's led by the South Australian R&D Institute in collaboration with these other research organisations and chemical companies, and funded by GRDC and South Australia's Grains Industry Trust Fund. This trial site is located in the Murray Mallee.
This particular plot, we have barley, and the 3 rows on this side have been had the fungicide applied deep banded below the seed. These 3 rows have not been treated with a fungicide, and you can see in this area here we have a patch of Rhizoctonia. It's severely affecting the plant growth on this side. The plants on this side are still affected, but they're performing much better.
The better performing rows in this plot had a band of fungicide placed 2 to 3 centimetres below the seed. In other plots, fungicide was applied as a split treatment, with half the dose placed below the seeds, the other half on the surface.
The fungicide at depth has been banded through a liquid fertiliser system, and the fungicide at the surface has been sprayed on with a fan jet turned at right angles, and it's applied as a band about 3 centimetres wide behind the press wheel.
As part of the site selection process, Predictor B, SARDI's DNA-based testing service, was used to confirm the presence of Rhizoctonia and check for other pathogens. Even before the seeds were sown, the researchers had confirmation Rhizoctonia was a problem here. Many growers rely on their own observations for confirmation of the disease's presence, interpreting random bare patches as evidence of Rhizoctonia damage. However, the last decade has seen crops sown earlier due to dry growing seasons. Bare patches are not often present in these crops because they establish quickly while the soil is warm. During winter, when the soil is cold, root development slows and the fungus feeds on the root system, creating unevenness in the crop's height.
Yeah, I'm sure that most growers and many agronomists don't necessarily link this uneven growth in sort of mid to late winter as being due to Rhizoctonia. People would normally be looking for these bare patches as a diagnosis or a way to identify Rhizoctonia in the crop.
While uneven height is far more common than bare patches, both symptoms can also be caused by other problems. There's only one way to unearth the truth.
Okay, Paul, we'll collect one of the treated plants out of this plot and we'll go for a plant that looks like it's not too badly affected by rhizo.
It's only by carefully uprooting the plant and examining its root system that the presence of Rhizoctonia can be confidently confirmed.
Well, the system we use is to use a cut-down shovel. Put the blade between the rows and push straight down. You don't want to cut too close to the plant because you'll cut the roots off. Push it down just 10 to 15 centimetres and then lift the plant out of the soil sideways. If it's a sandy soil, you can gently shake the soil off, but it's better to actually soak it off in a bucket of water. Okay, Paul, you can see there's a good root system on these plants, but it's very hard to tell if there's any Rhizoctonia on those. So let's wash those and see if we can see how healthy the system is.
This sample is from a row where fungicide was only banded below the seed.
We can see on this plant that all of these crown roots up here, which we couldn't see clearly before with the sand, they've all been taken off with Rhizoctonia. So you can see the tipping quite clearly on these. And the root systems below the seed are in quite good condition, and this is where the fungicide, which was placed below the seed, about 3 centimetres below the seed, has protected the primary root system.
Crown roots are the last to develop and allow a plant to tiller. The fungus cuts back these crown roots, stopping further tillering and so reducing the amount of grain the plant can set. These 3 samples show the impact of fungicide placement, starting with an untreated plant.
There's no fungicide to protect either the crown roots or the seminal root systems. This plant has a seed treatment, which is the current practice for people trying to use fungicides to protect plants from Rhizoctonia. So the seminal root system is not too bad, but we're not getting any protection of the crown roots. Here we've got fungicide banded above and below the seed at seeding, and we've got good protection of the seminal roots, and we've also got good protection of the crown roots. I think we look like we're going to be able to generate some useful information that will help support a banding recommendation for these new fungicides.
Reduced tillering, uneven growth and bare patches were evident across the trial plot.
And what people also haven't appreciated until recently is that Rhizoctonia, although it used to damage the seedlings and cause dramatic symptoms in the crop, very early in the crop, most of the modification of Rhizoctonia these days is actually in the spring. So by the time you get to harvest, that's when the fungus has reached its maximum levels in the soil.
Summer weed control research, led by CSIRO, has underpinned this improved understanding of Rhizoctonia build-up. The research has also demonstrated the importance of controlling summer weeds to reduce the risk of Rhizoctonia.
It's only been the last couple of years that we've really understood or appreciated that it's the grasses that are driving the Rhizoctonia levels.
Other research has also found that crop rotation has a much bigger impact on Rhizoctonia levels than previously thought.
Canola in particular is very good at reducing the Rhizoctonia inoculum down to a level that will cause minimal damage to a crop. So the first wheat crop after canola is generally pretty good, doesn't have a lot of Rhizoctonia damage in it, but by the time you've got to the end of that wheat crop, by harvest, the Rhizoctonia levels will be back up to the pre-canola levels.
While the Rhizoctonia project has a year to go, the results so far have been promising.
And over the last 2 years we've averaged about 6% yield increase with fungicides banded below the seed. And in the split applications the yield responses have been around 12 to 16%.
And although the fungicides being trialled are yet to be registered and application rates finalised, the work being done in these trials will be used by the companies to include banding recommendations on their product labels. In the meantime, there's a word of caution for those grain growers who believe they overcame their Rhizoctonia problem years ago.
And I suspect in many of those paddocks that historically had a problem, the growers consider they've now controlled it. If they have a closer look at those paddocks, they'll find it's actually still active in those paddocks.
Now you can get more information about Rhizoctonia from this GRDC fact sheet, and the link on screen is where you'll find it. Now, just because construction of the AGIC complex is a couple of years off doesn't mean its research work hasn't started. This is one of AGIC's first labs, and research into the physical properties of dough is underway already. Research of a very different kind, though, has seen a New South Wales grain grower travel to India to investigate mung bean production. His aim was to learn from the country where that pulse is a highly important staple.
For decades, Xavier and Heather Martin have used mung beans as a summer rainfall opportunity crop on their New South Wales property. But over the last 5 years, the broadleaf legume has gained more importance in their farming system.
What's really good about mung beans is the short growing season. So it's in and in the silo, in and out and in the silo before you've had time to blink. We also found it very beneficial for breaking the disease cycle with wheat.
With low nutrition requirements and providing good summer grassweed control, this break crop fixes nitrogen in the soil, saving a financial input for the next crop. And mung beans don't deplete the entire moisture profile.
They tend to only use the top half a metre, maybe 600, 700 mils maximum, so you've still got some moisture left that then doesn't take as much topping up to get back into a winter rotation or a following summer rotation.
Another advantage is not being directly linked to a specific market, aiding growers in risk management.
They're really a vegetable, and so you're not beholden to the commodity markets. And I think the point being is seen in that it decouples from the soybean price quite effectively, even though there is notionally some relationship in terms of how and where it might be grown.
Under the National Mungbean Improvement Program, led by Queensland's Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry with GRDC support, the industry has doubled in size. Genetic gains have seen the variety Crystal deliver a 20% yield increase on older lines, as well as provide improved disease resistance. And in the breeding pipeline is another variety that's expected to lift yields a further 10%.
We're dealing with an industry now of around 70,000 to 80,000 tonnes per annum, so it's quite a solid and substantial industry.
While 70,000 tonnes isn't huge in terms of global production, it does represent around 60% of what's traded internationally, making us a significant player on the global stage. And international trade is where the profits are, with countries like India being massive mung bean consumers.
In India, mung beans are a staple food. They have a long shelf life over there, and I think they're available to everybody.
Little wonder then that Xavier and Heather used prize money from receiving last year's Australian Mungbean Association Production Award for Excellence to head overseas to see how crops are grown by the nation producing the world's largest volume of mung beans.
To go to India, where there's 1.5 million tonnes of mung beans in consumption, black gram and green gram, and see how they do it, what they're doing, what their challenges are, and how they're addressing those, was really excellent.
As well as ideas on continual cropping, Xavier gained valuable insight into traditional mung bean nutrient requirements.
I think it's really important to understand the soil fertility that you're looking to plant your mung beans in, to understand not just the micronutrients but the major nutrients, and making sure they're within a reasonable zone, and if not, addressing that with some sort of starter fertiliser is going to be important to have a healthy plant.
The industry has seen healthy prices too. Returns for mid-range processing mung beans have been between $750 and $850 per tonne.
With good returns available, there's plenty of incentive to grow mung beans. But what should growers take into consideration when looking to plant this short-season pulse?
It's really important to manage the things we can manage, to do the preparedness, to leave the only thing perhaps to chance should be rainfall. If everything else is covered off, chances of having a great success at the other end are greatly enhanced.
Being able to get the crop harvested and onto aerated storage in a timely manner is also key.
It'll keep quite well for quite a few months, and so there's time to understand what qualities, what quantity you've harvested, and to market that effectively. And the opportunities can change dramatically. I've seen pricing double in less than 30 days.
Successful marketing necessitates a shift in thinking.
It's not as simple as just delivering them to the local receival point. You need a good relationship with a marketer. They are sold internationally as a vegetable, and we keep saying that word, as a vegetable crop. So it's a different mindset for the Australian grower who's used to growing a cereal, wheat or sorghum.
Because this pulse crop is sold as a vegetable, post-harvest processes like grading, packing and certifying are also important.
They're exported and consumed virtually straight out of the bag that they're packed into here in Australia. So the presentation and the quality is paramount, and again, attention to detail by the grower to achieving that is terribly important. But it does position us at the upper end of the marketplace, and that's where the profit is for the Australian producers.
That profit can make a big difference to your bottom line.
The opportunity is there to get another $800 or $1,000 per hectare in that financial year, because they're such a fast crop. So you can turn 2% rate of return or a 5% rate of return into a 15 or 18% rate of return.
If you actually sit down and work out the dollar return per day of crop, mung beans would be one of your most profitable broadacre crops that you could actually grow. Again, much more akin to a horticultural crop.
And the future's looking bright, with demand on the rise.
We're seeing this emerging gap in production and consumption in the traditional marketplaces, being places like India, Burma, that part of the world. So they are short, and that gap is growing continuously.
The National Mungbean Improvement Program is set to continue to capitalise on that opportunity.
So plant breeding is the main focus of that program. We're also now starting to look at the agronomic processes, nutrition, time of planting, plant population, all those sorts of things, to really maximise the genetic potential in these new varieties that are coming out of that program.
As Xavier saw firsthand in India, Australia is well positioned to gain from growing international demand.
It was really hard to find any quality in the markets that was anything approaching Australia's quality. It gives me great confidence that if we do it well in this nation, we'll easily be able to meet and exceed the expectations of those hungry people around the world.
Now, since I last spoke with John Harvey, GRDC's Managing Director has been travelling the country talking with growers and grains industry partners about the future. And one of those future partnerships will be the Australian Export Grains Innovation Centre. John, welcome again, and tell us about AGIC. What is it?
Well, AGIC's about making sure, firstly, we get the market signals into our research programs and into our breeding programs. Also making sure we're doing the genetic research so that we get the quality into our varieties, and then doing the research that makes sure that we can process and handle and protect that grain and get it to our markets in shape and in the form that it needs to be to make sure it actually gets the highest possible price.
But was there a gap? Was a lot of that stuff not being done?
Well, I guess over the last 3 years, we've been looking at a national RD&E strategy, and a part of doing that was actually looking for areas where we needed to build capability, and this was one of the areas that nationally we believed there was a need for greater capability within Australia. So this is a national centre. It's based in West Australia. It's based in Perth. It is a partnership between GRDC and the West Australian Government, but it's a national program, and it will be serving the needs of all growers in Australia. Does it mean less duplication? Is it addressing that issue? Look, it is a collaborative model. It's looking at working with all the skills and expertise across Australia. I guess our vision for the centre is that it will have very strong international links and be building on research that's occurring in other parts of the world. So it's not just about Australia, it's about making sure Australian growers have access to the best possible varieties, best possible quality to meet their customers' requirements. Total investment of about $70 million, of which $20 million comes from GRDC. That's pretty substantial. You must have high expectations for the centre. It is a very substantial investment, and yes, we have very high expectations. It's a new way of doing business. It's in the formation of a company, so it will be quite dynamic and be able to respond to market requirements. The West Australian Government is putting $30 million into a new facility, into infrastructure, and also $20 million into the programs, and GRDC is matching that $20 million with $20 million, so that's over a 5-year period. So it's a substantial investment, and our expectation is it will really have a substantial impact on the quality of Australian grain going up into the Asian markets. Turning to GRDC itself, it's really been, over the years, a very lean model. Until recently, 40 full-time staff only, managing an investment that this financial year has gone up to $181 million. The organisation, I guess, recently has undergone a bit of a beefing up. Tell us about that. Yes, and my view on this is that we were too lean, and as a consequence of that, it was difficult for us to be responsive to our partners. And I think that was an issue for us. So over the last 12 months, we have put on additional staff. We now have 57 full-time employees within GRDC. My expectation is that that will mean we're able to be more responsive. We're able to put more work and more effort and more thought into how we actually deliver the results of research to growers. And as a consequence, growers get a greater benefit out of their overall investment in GRDC. Now, towards the end of the season just gone, you made it up into northern New South Wales. What impressed you about what you saw up there? Well, just prior to harvest, I was up in the Moree area, particularly west of Moree, out into some fairly dry country, and specifically talking to some of our larger growers and what they were doing on their farm. They've got an interesting farming system up there, and lots and lots of concern and difficulty around managing diseases like crown rot. And particularly with the very dry finish that we've had to the last season, there were a lot of whiteheads and lots of evidence of the disease in the paddock. I think the most impressive thing out there was seeing how chickpeas are now fitting into their farming system. Some of the growers there are talking about actually making more money out of chickpeas than they are out of their wheat rotation. And in particular, the growers were very, very complimentary about the new PBA varieties that have come out, and particularly PBA Hat-Trick, which has really revolutionised the farming system up there with its ascochyta resistance. So that was very encouraging to see the impact of research on those growers up in that particular part of the world.
Now, you've done a lot of travelling around the countryside, as you often do, but this time you've been talking to researchers more than producers. Tell me why that is and what that's about.
We're going around Australia talking particularly to our research partners, but also to grower organisations and grower groups. It's important, I think, they understand our strategic direction. It's also important they know who's in GRDC and who's the right person to talk to if they've got an issue or they want to do some work with GRDC. So it's really about informing our partners about our strategic direction and having, I guess, some contact with them and being able to have an honest conversation with them about the things we're doing well and the things that we can improve and how we can be a better partner. So it's been very much about that. I think, I'm very grateful that our partners are honest with us. They do tell us the good things, but they also tell us the things we can improve.
John Harvey, thanks again for joining us on GroundCover TV.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, before we completely forget about 2012, let's have a quick look back at one particular rural initiative.
G'day, I'm Glenn McGrath. Firstly and foremostly, you'll know me as a cricketer, but well before that, and still today, I'm an Aussie farmer.
The Australian Year of the Farmer had one motive, according to its patron, the Commonwealth Governor-General, Quentin Bryce, and that was to bring city Australians closer to their country cousins. The organisers scheduled an ambitious program of events, ranging from raising awareness about agricultural careers to taking the farm to the city. Well, late last year saw the launch of GRDC's Grain Inventors competition in partnership with the Year of the Farmer. The winner will receive $15,000 to kickstart the development of their innovative idea. That winner will be announced in a few months' time, and you never know, their invention could take its place alongside other great agricultural inventions from Australia, such as the Harrington Seed Destructor.
As an example of agricultural innovation, this is one of the most recent to have hit our paddocks, the Harrington Seed Destructor. Now in limited commercial production, many grain growers will know of this invention and heard of Ray Harrington, the West Australian who conceived and developed this heavy-duty weed seed terminator.
And the project was the big C. I was going to catch it, crush it, cart it, cook it or cremate it.
An organisation that has long supported agricultural innovation is the Grains Research and Development Corporation. This experimental robotic seeder is being developed by the University of New South Wales with the corporation's help. Late last year, to further encourage this type of innovation, GRDC launched the Grain Inventors competition.
Now we know there's lots of growers out there and lots of people out there that are tinkering in a back shed, that are looking at new ways of doing things and have got ideas that they're testing out. We want to see some of those innovations and we want to show them to the world.
Looking for a better way to do things is what got Paul Hick's brain ticking over. Like a lot of WA grain growers, he has to deal with non-wetting soils and poor crop establishment. Even a new seeder didn't fix the problem.
Where we'd been able to place the seed in the previous year's row, we got a 90–95% crop germination, and where it was in the inter-row, we were getting terrible germination, and it wasn't germinating until we'd had a follow-up rain.
Digging down across the row revealed the reason. After rain, it was clearly visible that the moisture had followed the stubble down into the soil. Between the rows, there was nothing.
That was the eureka moment, I guess. After that, it was just a matter of mechanically how do we get this thing to steer in the right spot and not block up and put the seed where it needs to go in the wetter. So that, I guess, was the inspiration to develop the system.
A system that required the development of a steerable drawbar, a stubble sensor to guide the seeder's path, and a customised seeding boot.
The seeding boot's quite unique in that we actually seed to the left about an inch or 25 mil. So the knife point is actually going up the side of the previous year's road. And then we have a wing that hangs out to the right and places the seed into the moisture.
Touchscreen control, a camera to monitor how the seeder is tracking, drawbar hydraulics, and an electronics module that can be retrofitted to most tractors built in the last 10 years complete a systems package that Paul Hicks calls Intelligent Tillage, or ITIL.
The driver, he just lifts the seeder bar up and down, and that's all he has to do. The rest of it looks after itself. So the combination of all those things is what's unique. Each of the technologies has been around, but it's the combination that makes ITIL unique.
Paul Hicks and his project partners have so far invested more than $100,000 into the system, which has grown from concept to reality in just 12 months.
Yeah, the investment is a big part of it, and you know what the GRDC is doing at the moment with the Innovation Award and helping promote that within the industry is critical.
The competition entrant who comes up with the best invention to benefit the grains industry will receive GRDC support to the value of $15,000 for the design, testing and development of their invention.
Well, at the end of the day, we don't care where the innovation comes from, we just want to make sure we capture the benefits of that innovation.
The winning invention might be the best thing since the stump jump plough, and it could also be that one glint of inspiration needed to keep other unrecognised grains industry inventors tinkering and burning the midnight oil as they work on their own innovative ideas.
That $15,000 prize in the competition is a welcome one-off, but of course GRDC's major investment is in the hard grind of R&D, and it currently invests in 900 research projects across 230 organisations. This gathering of researchers here in Perth is here for a briefing on GRDC's RD&E priorities and to ask questions about the corporation's strategic direction. Well, this next story looks at a research area that is definitely a hot topic for the grains industry: herbicide resistance.
Fence lines are not only boundaries, they're meant to be barriers to trespassers. But in the case of weed pests, they're not only an ineffective defence, they can be the place where herbicide resistance begins. For many years, on many properties, the systemic herbicide glyphosate has been the chemical of choice for the control of fence line weeds. However, due to the almost exclusive use of this one herbicide, some weeds have developed glyphosate resistance. This table shows the number of sites across the southern and western grain regions where glyphosate-resistant ryegrass has been documented. Fence lines are the most common site.
We recognise a lot of growers don't get round to spraying their fence lines till everything else on the farm is done. And we need something that's going to be robust under those circumstances. So that's why we're coming out and spraying these really bad fence lines with chemistry, because we want to know what really works.
And the fence line trial work has been running for 5 years. The project's goal is to increase the number of herbicide options for use on glyphosate-resistant ryegrass. Under evaluation are registered chemicals as well as other compounds currently not registered for this use but being discussed for future registration. And the best result has come from a chemical with a different mode of action, a contact herbicide.
Over the 5 years, the things that we've discovered is that glyphosate mixtures are generally ineffective. Spray seed can work if you've got low ryegrass populations, but tends to struggle in high ryegrass populations. And of the registered chemistry that we've looked at, 2 applications of spray seed 14 days apart has been the best treatment in every year.
Fence line populations of resistant ryegrass left uncontrolled will inevitably become a source of contamination.
This is our trial. It's got glyphosate resistant ryegrass in it, and as you can see, the glyphosate hasn't worked on the ryegrass, but when we turn to alternative herbicides, we can actually get control of that ryegrass. The problem with the glyphosate resistant ryegrass is that that seed will end up in your crop and you'll have glyphosate resistance in your cropped area. So we do need to use alternative methods for managing glyphosate-resistant ryegrass on fence lines.
And the incidence of in-crop herbicide-resistant weeds is on the rise. Across Australia, 5 weed species have evolved resistance to glyphosate: annual ryegrass, barnyard grass, liverseed grass, windmill grass and fleabane. In South Australia, several populations of annual ryegrass have been found to have resistance to paraquat.
I think grain growers in all regions should be looking at their weed management strategies, and in particular they should be looking at where they can take glyphosate use out of their rotation. If they've got a rotation that relies heavily on glyphosate, one of the things we know that's a high risk for getting glyphosate resistance.
What has the weed research community even more concerned is the development of resistance to pre-emergent herbicides, and in particular trifluralin, which is heavily relied on by wheat and barley growers.
This is what led us to look at alternative pre-emergent herbicides, and that research has allowed the introduction of, first of all, Boxer Gold. We did some early work with Boxer Gold. Secondly, with Sakura. We did the first field trials with Sakura in Australia. So what we have now is some Group J and Group K chemistry. However, everything else we're looking at for ryegrass management at the moment is Group J and K chemistry. So whilst we've brought some new herbicides in, we've only brought in 2. If growers don't rotate those herbicides, then they're going to end up breaking them. So I think the strategy should be that if trifluralin is still working for you, you should be adopting these new herbicides over at least part of the farm so you can keep trifluralin working. And if trifluralin has already failed, you should get into rotation between your Group J and Group K herbicides and not just rely on one of them for all of your weed control.
More pre-emergent herbicides are being evaluated, but won't be available for at least 4 years. So the recommendation for all grain growers is to rotate the chemicals used to vary the mode of action and adopt an integrated weed management strategy.
Whether they collect weed seeds with a chaff cart, whether they buy a seed destructor, whether they fallow, or whatever practice that they want to use. But they need to be building that into their rotation, because if we don't stop resistant weeds from setting seed, going back into the seed bank, we know that they're going to beat us.
My goodness, they breed noisy researchers here in WA, don't they? Well, one of the 230 organisations conducting research with GRDC support is the Northern Grower Alliance. And at a recent field day, the results of an NGA trial on the impact of soil lesion nematodes and crown rot on cereal and rotation crops produced some dramatic results. Seeing is believing. And in this case, what you're seeing is the impact root lesion nematodes have had on 2 popular wheat varieties. Same population levels of Pratylenchus thornii in both plots, but on the right, the moderately nematode-tolerant EGA Wiley, on the left, the intolerant Strzelecki.
That's the sort of result you're going to get by choosing the wrong variety where you've got root lesion nematode at any sort of concerning level of density.
This trial at Yallaroy in northwestern New South Wales is one of a number being run by the Northern Grower Alliance, in collaboration with New South Wales DPI and with GRDC's support. At the various sites, the impact of either Pratylenchus thornii or Pratylenchus neglectus on rotation crops is being assessed. This research follows on from earlier trials that focused on the northern region's other major cereal diseases.
3 or 4 years ago, we did a series of 22 trials looking at the impact of crown rot on a range of breadwheat, barley and durum varieties.
That earlier research revealed the impact of crown rot on yield was more severe where root lesion nematodes were present.
They're totally independent, but it appears that when you've got nematodes present, if you've got crown rot, the crown rot effects that you're seeing are going to be much more dramatic.
And that's because of the way the 2 diseases attack the plant. Root lesion nematodes burrow into the roots, damaging the plant's ability to take up water and nutrients, whereas the crown rot fungus sends mycelium up into the vascular system, which further inhibits the flow of moisture. Without moisture and nutrients, seed heads don't fill and dry off, leaving a telltale white head. EGA Wiley is a variety that not only has moderate resistance to nematodes, it also has a similar level of resistance to crown rot. However, in particular seasons, moderate resistance is not enough.
When you put it under high crown rot pressure, get a hot dry finish, which really exacerbates the expression of those whiteheads, you'll still get 50% yield loss to crown rot in EGA Wiley, a moderate resistant variety.
If people get it wrong, they can lose 20 to 50% of their yield. I mean, it can be absolutely catastrophic.
Rob Long is a local agronomist whose work also involves assessing cereal varieties for crown rot. This past season, no variety was spared from infection.
The last 2 years have been wet springs and we haven't noticed any yield implication at all, but in those years the infection rates haven't dropped, the inoculum's still there, but where you get the perfect storm like this year, where you get a wet start and a really dry spring, those whiteheads and yield losses are dramatic.
Crown rot lives in retained stubble, which is why it's become such a serious problem for the northern grains region. When new crops emerge, the fungus will be waiting to spread.
The way that does that, you get a basal infection in the base of the plant here, you get the characteristic browning, and given moisture stress, the fungus proliferates in the base and clogs up that vascular system, and you can't get water up to the heads, and that's where you get these classic whiteheads.
While crown rot is expressed as whiteheads, not all whiteheads are necessarily caused by this fungal infection. Mice damage or the disease take-all will also produce whiteheads, although take-all, as the name suggests, will take the entire plant rather than random tillers. However, a lack of whiteheads in a crop doesn't mean crown rot isn't present. The real indicator of the true level of infection is the presence of basal browning.
So this one here is unaffected at this stage, so there's no basal browning, so that's the normal colour you expect, this sort of lighty green. And here's one infected with crown rot. You've got this characteristic, they call it a honey brown colour, produced by the fungus.
All cereals are susceptible to crown rot, but durum wheats are the hardest hit.
Well, the Northern Grower Alliance did some really good work in 2007, 2008, and in the 2008 year, which was similar to this year where it had a wet start and a dry finish. The average loss in bread wheat, average yield loss, where the only difference was either the presence or absence of the crown rot inoculum, was about 27%, whereas for durum it was 58%.
The key to managing crown rot is to break the cycle of cereal sown on a cereal stubble. Rotation crops such as chickpeas, faba beans and canola are recommended, and crop canopy plays a significant role.
Canola closes over the ground quite early, produces a big bulky crop, get all that leaf drop, and that leaf's high in nitrogen. You actually then drive decomposition of the cereal stubble underneath a lot more, and you'll break down more stubble and therefore get rid of a lot more crown rot. Whereas the chickpeas, slow early on, generally don't get the cover till late, certainly don't give you as good a decomposition of cereal stubble underneath the chickpea crop as you get with some of those other breaks, but still is very useful in our system.
And chickpea will leave more soil water at depth for a following cereal crop than canola will. Another way to break the disease cycle is to make use of GPS technology.
In a no-till system, stubble retained, you actually confine your inoculum to that old row. So sowing back with guidance in between the row, you remove contact between your new crop and this stubble which has got the crown rot fungus in it. And we know we need intimate contact between an infected piece of residue and the new crop to initiate an infection. So roughly we're finding that inter-row sowing reduces our crown rot levels by about 50% just by that simple interaction of where we put our next row.
And while there is some discussion about the use of strategic tillage in this no-till age, for weed control reasons, where crown rot is present, Stephen Simpfendorfer doesn't recommend its use.
Some of these aggressive strategies growers use, like Kelly chains and things to try and break that stubble up, can actually make their crown rot problem worse, in that they've spread their inoculum more evenly across a paddock and they've taken a lot of moisture out of the system, which might have allowed them to actually compensate and deal with that infection a bit better.
But it seems growers can't rely on breeding programs alone to find a solution for managing crown rot.
Varieties are not a key tool for crown rot. They're certainly a useful tool. You can get about a 15% difference in yield loss from swapping from something that's very susceptible into moderate resistance. And I guess the key one is really getting out of durums. If you're in a high risk, they suffer a lot more yield loss. But you need an integrated approach with that inter-row sowing, break crops.
The Northern Grower Alliance's trial is also studying the impact root lesion nematodes have on rotation crops, and ultimately the research will produce recommendations that will have application for the management of nematodes and crown rot.
Brassica, which is a broadleaf crop, helps to break down the wheat stubble, so it helps to reduce the crown rot issue. Cotton, sorghum, sunflower, all fall into that same camp. So in general, the things from a good rotation point of view that are going to help reduce the impact and the threat from root lesion nematode, in general, are also going to be things that are advantageous in terms of crown rot management.
But going back to those first images we saw, when it comes to root lesion nematode management, varietal selection is important.
Growers have a lot of ammunition, a lot of power to improve their management by their variety choice. We don't get that with crown rot. With crown rot, it's really the rotation and our stubble management, which is our key tool to to reduce the problem. Variety choice is really a very small part of it. With root lesion nematode, it's a critical part of it.
Here in WA, the lack of a viable pulse break crop in the rotation is a major issue. And in southern New South Wales, where there are a range of pulse crops to choose from, it is surprising that the area grown to pulses isn't larger. But with the successful breeding of suitable pulse varieties for the southern region, growers are being given more cropping choices and greater flexibility in their fertiliser and weed management.
It was at Wagga Wagga in southern New South Wales that the very first field pea trials in Australia took place in 1894. Around that time, the Sunshine Harvester first began to rattle its way across paddocks. These days, it's a purpose-built mini-harvester that combs the Agricultural Research Institute's trial plots. Pulse Breeding Australia drives the pulse research done here. PBA is a joint venture between state agricultural agencies, the Universities of Adelaide and Sydney, Pulse Australia and the GRDC.
Some nice varieties coming through. I reckon they're about twice the height and bulk of the current old varieties. I reckon there's a goer there.
Yeah.
In a region where wheat and canola are the main crops, there's been a resurgence of interest in pulses. And the reason for that is continuous cereal cropping has depleted soil nitrogen levels, forcing growers to apply more fertiliser, and that's expensive and sometimes problematic.
Peak demand in that through post-sowing, that July, August, September period, urea is very hard to come by. The price generally fluctuates quite significantly, and generally always on the up. And also getting the reliable application, and that's one of the biggest issues, is getting farmers getting bigger, so farmers are having to spread large areas in a shorter period, and actually getting reliable rainfall to come through and incorporate that urea is it's causing a lot of issues in terms of the efficiency of that urea.
While pulses are grown to the north, south and west of this region, what's discouraged southern New South Wales grain growers from including a legume in their crop rotations is a lack of markets and the necessary infrastructure and the region's unique red-brown acidic soils. Pulses came to Australia from the Northern Hemisphere, where they grow predominantly in alkaline soils. But with the National Pulse Breeding Program producing regionally adapted varieties, growers now have greater cropping flexibility, and that means less dependence on man-made nitrogen fertilisers.
A huge proportion of the air we breathe is nitrogen, and that's the fundamental source of nitrogen for bagged fertiliser. And we have these clever little plants called legumes which actually do it all free of charge and also produce a crop at the same time.
As a legume, most pulse crops are able to convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium, a soluble form of nitrogen available to plants. Chickpeas, for example, will produce approximately 20 kilos of nitrogen per tonne of above-ground dry matter. However, as slightly more than half of the chickpeas' stored nitrogen is below ground, the resultant multiplier effect means the total estimated fixed nitrogen is approximately 40 kilos per tonne of dry matter.
One of the biggest positives with growing a pulse crop is that you don't have to put any nitrogen on the pulse crop, and generally the second crop after that you don't have to put any nitrogen on. So you've got 2 years of that one paddock where you don't have to top cress a nitrogen.
Canola and wheat cannot do that, only legumes do it. And so it's a much more reliable, secure, safe form of nitrogen to have it fixed in a legume, to make it available for the next crop and the subsequent crop after.
As well as providing an alternative source of nitrogen, pulses can be used to provide competition for weeds and deliver a cash crop. Newer varieties have been bred to allow herbicides to be applied to control in-crop weeds without inhibiting the pulse from reaching maximum growth.
Particularly in field pea and lentil, which are a very quick maturing crop, we've been focusing on developing very early varieties, so when they mature you can actually crop top or spray, control the weed without damaging the development of the grain, so you can actually take the crop through to full grain harvest and have total weed control of the resistant weeds. That's, to me, that's having your cake and eat it.
10 k's out of Wagga Wagga, the Beck family has, like many in the region over the past decade, moved away from cereal and pasture farming systems to continuous cropping. But that's beginning to change.
This is our first year that we've grown a wheat crop on a pea crop, and it's probably by far our best wheat.
And having the main road run past the property, there's been a lot of calls from neighbours curious about the field peas.
Whether you fallow them out or harvest them is probably the main question. There's a lot of pretty common practice at the moment to fallow the field peas out, to sow them early and grow the biomass, which we did on the other side of the road here, but we fallowed them out, and probably 2 tonne to hectare potential of field peas that we've knocked out. So you'd be reluctant to just fallow a pea crop that unless you're forced into doing it.
This season, the peas will be going to market, and Ben Beck's recommendation to other growers is to work pulses into their rotations.
They're easy to grow, and they extend our sowing window, so there's no pressure to sow them. They're always sown quite late. We try and harvest them between the wheat and canola, so they can fit into your rotation. They're not. It's just got to have somewhere to store them, and be prepared to fiddle around a bit to get your header to set up right, to feed in right, and they should be fine.
These represent the 3 different types of peas that we grow and market.
The other message these research agronomists would like growers to hear is to treat pulse crops as seriously as they do wheat and canola.
Treat it as a main crop. Don't treat it as the last thing you sow, last thing you harvest. You've got to do things right, and you've got to do things well. And you might as well not grow it if you're not going to do a good job of it.
Pulse breeding has come a long way since 1894, especially in the last 6 years as a result of the industry partners' coordinated and cooperative approach. And with the National Breeding Program giving researchers what they need to tailor regional solutions, growers now have a more sustainable farming future, one in which pulses will have an important role, even in the unique soils of southern New South Wales.
They grow them in northern New South Wales, they're making a success of it, they do it in Victoria and South Australia. So these growers are now becoming really serious, and I think that's pretty exciting because they're going to do the proper job, they're going to make it work. And given new, more reliable, better disease-resistant, higher yielding varieties with good market end uses, I think it's really optimistic.
Well, that's just about it for this episode, but as always, there is a special feature on this DVD. Here's a preview.
And so, the genetic work that we've done to date has actually shown that we are actually getting movement of red-legged earth mites from Western Australia into the east coast or vice versa. So we're actually getting a mixing of populations across WA and the east coast of Australia.
To watch that full feature on emerging pests, diseases and weeds, go to the menu and select Special Feature. Well, that's it from WA today. We'll see you next time on GroundCover TV. We'll be back in May. Catch you then.